All right, welcome everybody to the Kentuckiana group, Kentuckiana FileMaker Developers Group. What month are we in? This is June, right? So it's the June meeting of the Kentuckiana FileMaker Developers Group. For those joining us on YouTube, you can join us live the fourth Tuesday of every month. The meeting is at 12:30, starts at 12:30 Eastern time. Uh, all are welcome, regardless of skill level, regardless of experience. We love to have anybody come and join us and join in our conversations and presentations. So uh, come on and join us. And today our presenter is Dennis Burnham, and he's going to be giving us a presentation and it's going to go over all of the different design tools available in FileMaker. And for those of us that have been around for a while, we'll probably get a little bit of refresher, and I guarantee we'll probably get some surprises because whenever we do these kind of sessions, we always find that I didn't know that was a common comment. So with that being said, I'll be happy to turn it over to Dennis.
Thank you, Ron. I'm hoping you can all see my slide and you can hear me.
We can't see your slide yet.
You can't see my slide yet. All right, let me go back to this
It looked
Zoom
like it
share.
tried to pull up a minute ago, and then we lost it. So
Yeah, I pressed share
there,
and
there you go.
okay, and now I can press play in Keynote and we should be good to go.
You are good.
Okay, so thank you again for inviting me, even on short notice. I'm happy to be here. The idea for this presentation came from a gentleman at Harmonic Data in Dallas a few years back when he mentioned that so many people were claiming they struggled with design. I didn't know it was a struggle for them, so I put this presentation together. My background in desktop publishing preceded my FileMaker career with about 15 years of work in Adobe Illustrator, Photoshop, Quark Xpress, and so on. Some of the topics are things you may already know. I did a little work a few days ago after Ron invited me to add some things that are newer than what we had in 2020 when I last presented this design topic. There are certain FileMaker things that I covered that I wished I myself hadn't waited so long to discover. So I hope that's true for you, even though there may be some things that I talk about that you already know. I'll try to keep it around an hour, hour and 15 minutes, and I'll move quickly as possible so there's time for Q&A. But if you want to interrupt me, please do. You'll also notice there's a small number at the bottom of each of my slides. So if you want to hold a question until the end and you want me to go back to that one, just make a note of that number. Yesterday, Ron asked me if I would also present something in September. This is something that I showed just a few weeks ago to a Dallas audience. I'm still working on some of the API work for integrating. It's an add-on that will allow people who are FileMaker developers to earn passive income by creating merchant accounts for people you do business with. And coming soon is the best that I want to say about it now. If it happens that it's good enough to be done in September, then it'll be good enough for full access as well. What John was talking about for my presentation at Full Access is something I'm collaborating with Mike Ross about, which is a total non-technical topic. So working in FileMaker, there's a lot that we do that involves fields and scripts, schema, relationships, and various kinds of code. So it's tempting to say that the user interface is not everything. But for today, at least, it really is everything. And the question that I'm going to begin with is, why would this be meaningless to the people who use your FileMaker app? And the answer to that is simple. It's because they don't ever see what's under the hood. They don't see your code. They never view FileMaker Pro in layout mode. They just see the result of whatever you put together in layout mode for them. We had a game changer about 18 years ago in 2007 with the introduction of iOS. And that's when users really began to view software differently than the way that they were looking at things on their personal computers in the 1980s. So because there's no layout mode in iOS, I kind of encourage you to look at this through that lens when we're discussing design, because of course in iOS, we cannot view things in layout mode. I think it's important to understand the ROI benefit of a user interface. It costs money, and a lot of times clients are reluctant to spend money because they're looking for the performance and the coding that you do. But it's important not to give it away and to encourage people that the work that's done in design pays back. It pays back in productivity. If there's turnover of employees and training of new people is involved, it even makes a difference in morale. And if the owner of the company ever decides in the future to sell the company, then it adds value as a business asset, because any new owner can step in, and whether they knew anything about FileMaker or even the business operation as a new owner, they can step in and avoid any kind of disruption that might occur. So we all know that we have these starter solutions that come with every version of FileMaker. There are a lot of negative things I can say about them. I really dislike them. But there are a few positive things about them. One is that people can learn FileMaker very easily with no risk. And of course, that's what Claris is always encouraging. As a developer, you might open some of these up and learn some techniques that are built into them from the well-respected Claris partners who FileMaker hired to create them. And you can always encourage new prospects to go ahead and try something and then come back to you for the custom work. There's probably not much that a novice is going to be able to do trying to modify a starter solution. So they almost always will come back, because it's very rare that any particular starter solution is going to fulfill all of their business needs. Now, Claris encourages amateur work. And here's an example of amateur work. This was a fellow who I had worked with many years ago in Texas, and I often teased him that his mother didn't let him play with crayons when he was a child, and this is what he got as a result. But when you look at it carefully, what you notice is I have a theory about how things like this happen to evolve. And it starts with what I call layout creep. The creep begins in the northwest quadrant of a layout, and maybe it began long ago when the aspect ratio of somebody's display was 640 by 480. And of course, they've gotten bigger displays, and now almost everybody has a flat display. But you can recognize how something began when the size of the display that the developer was using was something small. Sometimes you can even recognize some FileMaker buttons that come from starter solutions in older versions, like 7 for sure. I don't know if we had starter solutions back in version 5. I can't remember that. But what happens is that they start to add fields and buttons without any particular consistency. So even if there were such things as styles and themes, if they existed back then, the kind of people we're talking about wouldn't have used them. They probably didn't even use the format painter that we've still got in the toolbar. And frankly, I still use that myself when I need to copy and paste something in an existing format, because maybe I'm under the pressure of time, or I'm just too lazy to create a style and put it into a theme. So if there's room on a display, sometimes what people do is they'll add a series of buttons over on the right-hand side, or they'll add even more if they've got more room on a wider display. And then if they run out of space, they'll start to put something at the bottom of the display. And in this case, the fellow learned how to build a tab control. So, he felt like he was more of a skilled developer at that point. And if they then still run out of space, they'll add a few more buttons at the bottom, provided that scrolling doesn't make them invisible to the users. And I can tell you that whenever I used to visit this guy at his office in Texas, his employees hated this. They had figured out just from memory how to use it, but they were praying for me to be able to sell him on a user interface. And I was only ever successful at giving him a new opening main menu screen. But once they clicked that button in the middle that says Enter FileMaker, they were back in their usual thing. It just wasn't as ugly when they opened up FileMaker to the first layout. The ideal scenario, of course, is when you're starting with a completely clean slate, somebody who's never had a FileMaker design done for them before, and maybe they were smart enough to retain a developer right from the get-go. So the first of several of these words of wisdom that I'll show you is one that Paul Rand wrote. And I think there's truth to this. Design is simple, and at the same time, that's what makes it so complicated. So, John, in your presentation of the full access change to the new homepage, it reminded me of this image that I put up. Every app that you build needs to have some kind of a home layout that all the users see when they launch. And even in iOS and Android, apps start up with some kind of a splash screen, even if it disappears after a few moments. This is one approach that you can use on a desktop or even on a phone, a main menu that looks pretty and it's easy to modify as the needs evolve. Find a photograph somewhere that the client recognizes and loves, and they'll begin to think of the FileMaker app as if it was a web page. Maybe it even resembles something on their own website. One important caution I'll give you is to, when you put that image into the body part of a layout, store it somewhere, because FileMaker doesn't allow you to click on the item in the inspector and know what the file name was or what the file path is. So in case you ever need it again because you want to adjust it or modify it somehow, a good way that you can make sure that you don't lose it completely is to just copy it and paste it somewhere in the scratch area on the right side of the live area of the layout. This one happens to be from a company that was organizing group travel for dental and vision clinics in Mexico. And the image that I used is exactly the same as one that they had on their website. FileMaker gives us grids and guides to work with. The menu item for turning grids on doesn't give you the same feature that you got in the inspector, where you can specify the major grid spacing and the minor grid steps. You can just turn it on or off when you're using the view menu. For the guides, it's a little bit more complicated because they give you the ability to turn on dynamic guides. And when you right-click on any guide, you have the option to either share it on all the layouts, lock it, or remove it. If it was up to me, that share feature would be a little bit more specific because it might be nice to share it only on certain kinds of layouts by name or maybe by platform that they're being used. But for the time being, this is what we've got. The feature for dynamic guides is really useful because it will present these little arrows that presumably will give you the measurement. Even whether it's displayed or not, it'll make sure that things are evenly spaced or evenly aligned. And you can turn the snap feature on or off for either the grid or the guides. I find it really useful to have the grid hidden, but the snap turned on so that it's just non-intrusive to be able to have that turned on and useful while you're working. Now, we've got a lot going on with inspectors that we didn't have in previous versions. Now, on the left side of the layout, we have 3 panels. The first one is the fields, and the point that I want to make to you about the field panel is that at the very bottom, you've got an area where you can dictate how you want the placement to occur, whether you want the labels to be used at all, whether they should be to the left of the field or on top of the field. And you can also determine whether you want the control style to be either an edit box or any of the other varieties. So if you're more comfortable using the inspector, it's the ones at the bottom that I rely on. I very seldom use this for dragging a field onto a layout. But it is useful that you can sort them the same way you would in the managed database. The objects panel is my favorite. I was thrilled when they gave us this feature a few versions ago because it eliminated all of the waste of time that we had to do to try to layer things. When you're working with the objects panel, you can drag certain things up or down in the list, but sometimes you'll find that they resist dragging. And when that happens, what I just generally do is I'll use the arrange menu to move up or move down. And it won't resist doing that, but it'll put it where logically it has to go in the next level or the next layer, shall we say, up or down. Being able to hide all other objects is a wonderful feature. If you're trying to find a particular object on a crowded layout and you can select it in the list, but you can't see where it is on the layout. It could sometimes be underneath other things or maybe on a panel that's not visible. Being able to hide all other objects is one that I use an awful lot. And I also encourage naming the object because when you have lots of things that are called group, it's really useful to name them, what the group actually consists of. There's a third panel for add-ons, which I'm not showing you because I don't have any add-ons to display. On the right side of the layout, we've got the familiar four panels. In the position, there's more visible than I can show you in this one slide, but the thing that I will show you a little bit more detail about later on is the position. You can specify all your measurements only once when you, in your settings, decide whether you want it to be in points or inches or centimeters. Personally, I leave it on points as often as I can because I like the precision that comes with things that are measured in points. And that goes for line thicknesses and fonts and padding and various other elements in the position. In the styles, you've got to do some work with styles. I'm going to talk a little bit more about styles later on. The one thing that Claris hasn't come up with yet as any kind of a tool or any guidelines is how to name them. So I'm in the habit of what you see in this slide, for example, when a field is called L11M, that's telling me that it's left justified, it's 11 points, and it's centered in the middle from top to bottom. But there are others that are variations. So for instance, you'll see one there that says field L11T, so that one is centered at the top. But there's no real naming convention that has evolved yet. So you've got to kind of invent one on your own. Or if there is one that's published in the community, I haven't found it yet. The panel for appearance is important. I very seldom deal with shadows. I very often work with lines and thicknesses of lines and padding because there's just something visually offensive to me when the text is actually hugging the left side of a particular field. But when something doesn't fit and you find a question mark showing up instead of the actual field value, sometimes it's because the padding is too great. And you'll find that's the case with some of the default values that you get on some of the themes that come with FileMaker. And then, of course, on the right side, we have the data. In the data, what I am working with a great deal is the hide feature. And I'm going to talk about that more in detail later on. But being able to hide objects on layouts by any kind of calculation that you can compose is really valuable. And also the placeholder text. Very often I find on a layout, the placeholder text is only needed if when something is in the field, no, excuse me, I'm saying that backwards. The field label is only needed if the value in the field isn't self-explanatory. So for instance, if there's a field with a phone number, I might put a placeholder text in there that says mobile phone, but I'll also have a label appear that indicates that it is a mobile phone, because otherwise somebody wouldn't know when they're looking at the phone number what kind of a phone it is. So you can also add a new inspector. It's something I hardly ever use, but it just throws another floating panel out onto the layout if you want to have two panels visible at the same time. Now, windows are dynamically sized to fit whatever the user's platform is. I know that's not a very clear way of saying it, but the thing is that when you're working with phones these days, the number of stencils that are given to you in FileMaker aren't nearly as much as the various models of iPhones that exist. And when you're dealing with the Android world, there's even more than that. But when the window size is dynamic, it will arrange itself to get as wide as the screen or display of the device allows. I often start with a horizontal layout that is useful for tablets when they're held horizontally, because that also works on the desktop. And when there's a budget that somebody's trying to conserve what they're spending to have a system built, they can have the iOS tablet use the exact same size layout as there is on the desktop, even if the objects on the layout may be slightly different. Now, there are some differences between Macintosh and Windows that are important. When you're working with a Windows layout and a scroll bar in something like a list view, it will steal 17 pixels from the width, and it also intrudes into the navigation part that may be above it. So that's an important thing to remember when you're working in list views for clients who are using the app on either Macintosh or Windows, or in some cases, both. You may have to detect the window, detect the platform and expand the window as part of a script step in order to make sure that something's not cut off. What I do sometimes is write a calculation that detects the platform and the layout view state, and based on whatever it is, it'll do some arithmetic to determine the top navigation, the header, the row height, and the footer. It becomes more important in reports where things have sub-summary parts, but it's just something to keep in mind if you want to have the layout not force the user to have to scroll left or right in order to see the entirety of what's being presented. So what you're looking at here is a little popover that I sometimes put near the footer of a layout, and I sometimes put a hide attribute on it so that it's only visible to me. And it's a way for me to very quickly remember what my dimensions are for the 6 important body parts, or I should say body parts, the layout parts, so that I don't have to drill into each one of them and memorize it. And if anything happens to change, I can always go back to this to refresh my recollection of what I wanted them to be. That often happens if I'm making a duplicate of a layout and having to make some changes to it. You can't see in the inspector what the width is of your layout. But if you hold your cursor right on the edge of the live area of the layout, it will display that value to you in a tooltip, and you can just drag until you're comfortable with that you reach whatever the value is that you actually want. All the other the layout parts, from the top navigation all the way down to bottom navigation, all you have to do is select them and you can see them in the inspector, but you can't see the width, and that's why this little tip is important. In this example, you're seeing the values expressed in points, and
Dennis,
you
Beverly
can.
has her hand up. I think she had a question.
Oh, all right. I'm not seeing the people, so go ahead and ask me.
Yeah, the width of the layout can be determined if you click outside of any objects, like even in the gray area of the layout, then you see it in Inspector. That's the width of the layout.
You're saying that if you put an object in the scratch area on the
I'm
right.
saying if you don't have an object and you
Oh,
click in the scratch area,
then you can see the width in the inspector.
you see the width of the layout. Yeah.
Yeah,
It'll
but you
that
can't
it'll
edit,
show up
but you
here
can't edit it in the
as the
inspector.
width. Okay. I guess my thought was that what I'm in the habit of doing is, when I know, for instance, that I want the layout width to be a certain number, that instead of trying to guess at it or trying to dial it in the inspector, I can just drag the right edge and the tooltip will show me the value dynamically as I move it left or right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Right?
you can change it in the inspector
Right.
as well, if you can see it. So.
Right. And sometimes if you notice in the position values that they go to 4 decimals, that could be because something unexpected has changed. So to me, that's an immediate indicator that I've done something unexpected. But it's nice that you can dial in right here, whatever the sizes are that you expect either objects or layout parts to be. The auto sizing, I think it really should be called not sizing, but anchoring. And it's really important when you're dealing with so many different phone or tablet sizes, because if you can create your layout to be smaller than whatever the maximum is, and you're careful with the way that you anchor the objects, then it will adapt itself properly to whatever device somebody is using. It's tricky. It takes time to get it right. Things will move unexpectedly, but it's probably one of the things that, as we hear more about the coming features in Clara Studio, that it will be more responsive to what the platform and the window size actually are. But this is what we've got now to work with. What you're looking at here is a report layout that was done for a railroad that has people who are submitting applications for things like easements. And the problem with, I don't know if you're able to see the tiny little badges on these objects, but this layout is using sliding, hiding, conditional formatting, color, all for making it behave a certain way when the PDF is generated. The problem that I am unhappy about is that the page break is unpredictable, especially when things are sliding upward. We do have in the view menu the ability to decide what objects are going to be shown with these little badges. So in the example I'm showing you, the field boundaries are visible and sliding objects and non-printing objects are visible. I haven't turned on the one for popover buttons, but I'm sure you've seen that. The one for placeholder text is the little rectangle that you see to the left of the eyeball in many of them. So we've done a lot of work on this layout to use placeholder text. But in all of the years that we've had FileMaker, we've not gotten the ability to control page breaks. I don't have a slide to show it, but it's something that I presented once in a Claris meeting. It was an idea to have a guide that you draw into a layout that you could right click on a guide and it would flag it to be a page break so that you could specify exactly where you want pages to break. It's just something that we've never had in FileMaker, and it's very common in desktop publishing to be able to indicate where a page is going to break in a report. So if it's a single page report, it's not a problem. But when it goes to another page, you might find that it's breaking right in the middle of a section that wasn't expected. So for the rest of what I'm going to be discussing today, it's not as much the artistic element as it is the things that borrow on arithmetic and FileMaker functions. So to begin with, I start with global variables. When I make any app open up, I'm capturing the device, the platform. In the case of the platform, I'm using the absolute value so that Windows becomes a number 2, not a -2. I'm capturing the user's account name. Whatever the privilege set is, I'm using the account privilege set function, not the current privilege set. And I'm installing whatever menu set is appropriate for that user. I'm either hiding or showing toolbars. In my case, most of the time, I think apps work better if the toolbar, maybe I shouldn't say that they work better. They certainly look better without the toolbar if you can manage all the things that are in the toolbar without letting the user touch them. And I'm also resizing the window and specifying the dimensions. Sometimes I'll also make it automatically center itself in the window that the user is using, because some people are more comfortable with that, but you can always drag it around to a different location if they choose to. I keep a little graphic handy on my computer, which I call access detectors, so that I don't have to resort to my memory or the help file to know the system platforms and the device numbers. I ran into a peculiar one a few months ago when I was doing an Android design, and I didn't know, I shouldn't say an Android design, I was doing a WebDirect layout for Android users. And I found that there was a thing in Chrome called desktop mode. And when desktop mode is turned on in somebody's Chrome browser on an Android device, it shows up as device number 6. I didn't know that device number 6 even existed until I couldn't figure out why it was working fine on my Android device, but not on my customer's Android device. And once I detected that there is a device number 6, I could script my way around that. The sizes that you get in the stencil list, you can't really rely on them completely. I think of them as a good starting point, but I want to make sure using a device of my own or a device in my client's office that I'm actually fitting it to the proper sizes, and the stencils make it better than not having anything at all to work with. There are some custom stencil sizes that you can use for the toolbar, the status bar, the record selector, and the vertical scroll bar that are a little more specific than what you see in the stencil list in layout mode. And what I've also done is I've created a database for myself that has as many different iPhone variations. I'll admit I haven't brought this database up to date for the last couple of years, but it seems like every time a new version of an iPhone is introduced, the screen size is a little bit different. I have noticed that if I stay with 375 pixels for the width, that's going to eliminate all but the tiniest iPhones from long ago. And then I can have the anchoring adapt itself to whatever is the width of the window. Scrolling is something that most users seem to tolerate. It doesn't all have to fit in the vertical height of their iPhone. And this is what that little database looks like. I can just select at the top in that blue global field, which version I'm looking at, and it'll show me the the toolbar, the menu bar, the width and the height for either landscape or portrait mode. Just a handy reference. Button bars. So we see a lot about button bars. They're really handy. What's nice is that they have a consistent look to them, but sometimes they don't necessarily fit. So what I've done is, I should also, before I go on, I've been able to name the button bar segments with calculations when necessary. So in this case, I wanted to indicate how many customers there are in the current found set. So that calculation becomes part of what's displayed in the segment, in each segment. So you can modify each segment differently with the calculation, but its colors will be consistent throughout. So if you've chosen a particular font for one segment of the button bar, you're going to get that font in all the segments. And the reason that I will sometimes use a vertical button bar rather than a horizontal one is because I don't run into the problem of the words being too long to fit. So in this example, because I didn't want human resources to be 2 lines when all the others are 1 line, and extending it to allow human resources to be on the same line would have made the button bar too long to fit on the layout, or the text would have had to have been too small. Made a vertical button bar instead. The only downside with the button bars is that they're stuck in the body part that, or whatever part they're in. They don't span across multiple layout parts. Now, the navigation parts, top and bottom, are handy. Certainly, they came to exist because they are unaffected by somebody pinching their display in iOS. So the navigation part remains consistent even if they have tried to zoom in on a certain part of the visible area in the body. They're also invisible when you go to preview, and they're invisible when you print. So I have sometimes found them to be really useful as a substitute for the status area. If I can put something like the continue button that appears when you're in a script that pauses, if I can put that in the top navigation area, I don't have to expose the status area for somebody to see that continue button. It's a mistake that I've made very often where I have forgotten that the user can't see the continue button, and they're running a script and all of a sudden it pauses and they don't know what to do, so they force quit their way out of the app. If they call me on the telephone, I can tell them to just hit the enter key and it will proceed. But as instead of opening the status area to make that continue button open, I really like the idea that I can put it in a navigation part, and as long as they're in browse mode, they'll be able to see it. I'm a big user and an advocate of custom functions. So the one that I'm showing you here is one that I often put in for telephone number entry. I don't want the user to have to type punctuation when they're entering a phone number. So instead, I make it possible for there to be a control panel, I'll show you one later on, where they can indicate how they prefer phone numbers to be formatted, either with parentheses or with hyphens or with dots. And then that's being a custom function. Once they specify that, the user only has to type in the 10 digits. Of course, I'm only talking about USA or Canada for 10-digit phone numbers. But it's faster for them to do the data entry if they don't have to use the keyboard to reach the punctuation keys, and it'll automatically format for whatever it is that they prefer. Here's an example that's really, really complicated that had to do with custom functions in order to specify the location, the color, the size of a number of values in a, this was an educational app for measuring kindergarten children and their ability to be ready for the next level of school. So there were several kinds of ratings. There was a score type that determined one kind of a rating or another, and there was a test number, and all of those values were put into one long custom function, which determined where the rating would appear going left to right on the screen, because the one that's visible is the one that isn't hidden. And it also determined what would be the color of the field. So in the shading and different levels of gradation were all determined by this custom function. I won't deny that it took a long time to build that, but once it was done, it made for a very beautiful array of data that they could see in browse mode, or they could print it. I hate the status area. For myself, I have removed everything from the status area except for the data viewer, the debugger, and the manage button. I do that because I don't want to inadvertently ever create a new record or delete a record. And I've pointed out to Claris any number of times. I can't even tell you whether it's fixed in the current version. I know that it wasn't fixed in 21, even though it was fixed in 17. It came back again to haunt us. And that was that in browse mode, the delete button was almost in the same position in the status area as the perform find button in find mode. And the consequence of that was that if somebody pressed a little bit too long on the perform find button, or maybe they double clicked, what would happen is a FileMaker error would pop up that says, are you sure you want to permanently delete the current record? And if I was lucky, it was somebody calling me on the phone to ask me, I didn't want to delete something. Why is it asking me if I want to delete the record? And of course, if they do delete the record, then you've got a problem of going back to a backup to try to restore the record. But my way of avoiding that is to make sure that in a custom menu, the delete button is just not visible at all in the status area. If they want to delete a record, I make sure that that's a delete button somewhere on the layout, not something in the status area. It's just one of many complaints that I have about the status area being too accessible to users who aren't certain what they're doing. So what you see in the lower left corner of the screen is my recreation of something that I consider important in the status area that's very useful, but I don't want all the other things that unnecessarily come along with it. So in control panels, almost every app that I build now has some kind of a control panel for the users. And the reason I do this is to give the company, maybe not everybody in the company, maybe just an administrative person, access to certain static values that they have the ability to change when they need to. They shouldn't have to call a developer when something like a price changes or some other particular value. In this case, there's a list of users. They can add users if they need to. But I'll also designate one person in the company who has the privilege set that allows them to manage accounts that don't have full access. If you're familiar with this, you know that they cannot define the privilege set, but they can change the privilege set that's assigned to an existing user. They can add and delete users. They can also decide which users are inactive, and if they need to, they can reset passwords for people who have forgotten the password, and they can enter some kind of a description in the managed database that they see. Sometimes there can be more than one person, but at least one person in the company should have the ability to do this, because it relieves you of the burden of having to write scripts that do the same things that they can do for themselves in a self-service way. And to do that, I think it's important for you to learn your client's business. once you learn what it is that they do, you can create the control panel that's appropriate for them and you can add to it as much as you need to. In my case, I start with maybe 3 or 4 tabs, but I'll add others as I go along to manage the things that I learn about in their particular line of work. So this is just to suggest that I am a font addict. When I'm going to the movies, the credits are interesting to me because I'll look at the credits and I'll appreciate the time and effort that have gone into the selection of a particular font. Fonts are not easy in FileMaker. Back in 2006, Nick Orr from Australia gave us this list of cross-platform fonts, but it's obsolete today. He tells me that he hasn't done the work to bring it up to date. I tried my best to do that. The iOS fonts are extensive. So if you're using a layout, if you're building a layout that's going to be used in iOS, it's important to choose a font that you know will work in iOS. The reason I emphasize Tahoma is because it's installed by Microsoft Office, which makes it very widely used throughout the world. Anybody who has Microsoft Office or Office 365 installed on their machine has Tahoma. And also the metrics of the font are consistent from Macintosh to Windows. I made my own list of cross-platform fonts a few years ago in preparation for doing this presentation. And I can rely on that instead of the original list that Nick made years ago. Now, this comes as a surprise to a lot of people because they don't know why the list of fonts that appears when you pull down the font selector, why it has these 3 regions. And the reason is because the first region is all the fonts that are in your system. I should say that's the bottom group, all the ones in the FileMaker app and all the ones on a particular layout, each one grouped separately. What I am missing in FileMaker, and I wish we had it, is the kind of a feature that Adobe gives us in a document where you can see all the fonts that are in the entire document. So for instance, if I notice that in this example that you see on the left, if Arial appears somewhere in the app, I can't tell where, and I would have to go layout by layout to make sure that I'm locating it. And the ability to find and replace by the font name just doesn't exist yet in Claris. So the fonts that are in the current file are highlighted there in that group. And the ones that are on a particular layout, you have to go layout by layout to detect them. There are font tools available that you may or may not know about. Extensis used to call their font tool Suitcase Fusion. They changed the name to Connect a few years ago. It's not very expensive. It creates what they call a font vault so that you can manage the fonts that are open automatically, or at least for the desktop publishing programs like Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign, they will auto open a font if a particular document calls for it. We don't have that yet in FileMaker, but at least if you're a font addict like I am and you want to manage your fonts, Extensis Connect is a great way of doing it. I have copies of Font Doctor and Finagler, but I seldom will go to them. I'm a strong advocate of Developer Assistant as a plugin for all the things that it can do. There's a program made by, I can't remember now who makes a default folder, but it is a handy way of navigating to things. And I also like using Text Expander, especially for certain things in FileMaker that I want to type with a few keystrokes and have the entire function name appear in my calculations. This is a handy thing that I've been using. I don't know if anything similar exists for Windows, but the emoji menu that appears in the Macintosh keyboard drop down from the menu bar will give you access to all kinds of characters. In this case, I was actually building a database for somebody who teaches people how to play bridge. And it needed the 4 symbols for the heart and the spade and the diamond and the club throughout the use of that application. So being able to pull those characters out of the emoji and symbols menu is wonderful. Very often there's a need for something that you can just grab, like a math symbol or arrows, and you can't really type arrows in FileMaker, but as text that you pull from this feature, you can. This is just to humor you a little bit. It was a graphic that I found many years ago when I was doing desktop publishing work. What's nice about it is that you see the difference at a glance between the serif and sans serif fonts, and they're identified if you want to very quickly, choose a font by name. Now, if you're a font addict like I am, this movie is available on Amazon Prime or Vimeo. I think it's wonderful because it goes into a lot of the history of modern font design. Until the 1950s, there really wasn't anything that was as dominant as Helvetica. But Helvetica became the most widely used font. You'll see it on things like every American Airlines plane. Verizon uses it in italic for their logo. In the 1960s, when John Lindsay was the mayor of New York, he had the entire New York City subway system, the maps and all the indicia for the subway trains and the buses were all done in Helvetica, and it was done for clarity, for legibility. So if you're looking for something entertaining as a sort of an odd video, this is one that I recommend. Now, serif and sans serif is a debatable topic. People have their preferences for one or the other. Traditionally, serifs were used for body text for legibility and reading. And the reason for it was that the baseline things that you see at the top or the bottom of the letters are supposed to guide the eye into reading faster than what can be done with sans serifs. That research has been proven long ago, but in FileMaker, I'm not sure that it just necessarily applies. Here you see a few examples of different uses of serifs. Here you see the serifs used for the main headline and attorneys at law in sans serif at the bottom. This is a company that changed its logo from serif to sans serif a few years ago. Yahoo also did the same, although the one that they chose that you see at the bottom has these little indentations at the top and bottom of the H and the Y and the A. It's a font that I'm going to guess it's called Optima. And here's a bank that went from a serif design to a sans serif design, keeping their logo but making it a little bit larger. And you've all heard of this company, of course. I don't know why they would get away from what was a beautiful serif type. That lowercase g is just especially pretty. And if you look closely at the two O's, you see how the center part of the O, which is called a counter, how it's just slightly tilted to the left, and the same with the lowercase e has a little tilt to it. But they went for a sans serif version, maybe for legibility. Adobe has tools that are available. Apple has tools that are available. I avoid using text edit because sometimes it'll show you more than just the text. BB edit is much better for that. And if you're interested in using Text Wrangler, make sure you're not on a 64-bit computer because it's limited to 32-bit. I think it was acquired by Barebones, the publishers of BB Edit, because I can see in the bottom of that graphic, it offers people who are looking for a 64-bit version to use BB Edit instead. You have in Adobe, as I said before, you have the ability to select fonts and do a find and a change all. And that's also available in Photoshop and Fireworks. Now, the master detail layout, you often see this demonstrated in different community presentations. It used to be something that took effort to build, but now it's really, really easy. You put a portal on the left side of a layout, and you're going to choose a current table as the context, and then you can click on any item in the portal, and it will display that record without you having to do any kind of special scripts. The only thing you do have to work with is the find and sort, because the find and sort are not automatically part of what you do in a normal portal. So you can see the blue all button at the top that will take the result of a find and bring you back to a show all condition. And that all button also will sort them in alphabetical order, so the users are familiar with what they see. It's a really fast way of doing what you used to do with go to related record, and you can't filter these portals because that's dimmed, but it also eliminates the need for having a table occurrence in your relationship graph. And you can use conditional formatting, as I've shown here, just to indicate which record is the current one. We talked about the layout objects palette a little bit before. One of the things that I like to be able to do is filter it, and the filter works beautifully. Just being able to type in that field and it'll narrow down to the object that you're looking for by its name. That's another good reason to name the groups. So for instance, where you see one halfway down that says grouped button, it would have been smarter for me to give that grouped button a name that would differentiate it from the other grouped buttons. And you can also use the conditional formatting by right-clicking on any of the items that you find in that object list. Now, selecting members of a group improved in version 18, and deleting the object became a lot easier, but you still can't add something to an existing group without first ungrouping the group. It's easier to rearrange the layering by just dragging them up or down or using the menu. The object names are visible even if it's not selected. When there's a hierarchical group, you can temporarily ungroup the objects, but it can get a little bit confusing. So fortunately, the undo in the menu bar of your application is your way out of that. What I sometimes do when I want to get something out of the way is I'll add a really specific number to the position. So in this example, I've got something that is originally positioned 1 point from the left, and I've just added 1500 to it. And it puts it way out of view, and I can very easily select it in the layout objects and then bring it back to where it belongs when I'm done doing other work that might be obliterated or hidden by it. You can't paste anything into a tab control, but you can paste into an individual tab. So you have to understand that they've locked that feature out. You can't just like add a new tab to a tab control through the inspector. I'm a big user of conditional formats, and there's all kinds of reasons to use it. Unfortunately, the one thing that we don't have, or maybe two things we don't have with conditional formatting yet, is that we can't specify line colors and line thicknesses. And there was something else that we can't do with it, but I can't remember what it is right now. Portal filtering, really, really useful to be done with whatever calculation you might write. Important to remember that in filtering, The zero result is the false result, and that causes something to be hidden. And the number one is allowing it to be shown. That's the true value. That's the opposite, of course, of the hide attribute that we have in the inspector, where in the hide attribute, the true is hidden and the zero or the false value is letting it be shown. So if you've read anything about Steve Jobs' biography, you know that design was a really important element of his college career at Reed College and his early work with the Macintosh. Here is like a blast from the past. These were the fonts that we had in the original Macintosh. Susan Kerr is responsible for a lot of the early icons that we had with the original Macintosh. Her biography is an interesting one to read up about. And there was a book back in those days by not the Robin Williams, you know, as a comedian. It was a female Robin Williams who was making the point that the Mac isn't a typewriter in the title of her book. And it was all about using the Mac to do the kind of designs that we were doing in things like Mac Paint and Mac Draw, if you remember those. So Steve Jobs had a lot to do, obviously, with the Mac itself. But there were various things about the Mac and design that he had a hand in. Bill Atkinson just died a few weeks ago, so I had to prepare this special slide. You may know of Bill Atkinson as the inventor of HyperCard, but the thing that I remember most about him when it comes to design is that Bill Atkinson is the person who was responsible for round corners. And if you know anything about the Apple product line, you'll know that every machine, whether it's an iMac or a Mac Mini or any of the phones or tablets, even the Apple TV device that may sit on your bureau in your living room, all have round corners. The initial challenge he had was that Steve Jobs wanted the windows that pop up on your screen to have round corners. Steve Jobs wanted everything to have round corners. And if that's a part of his legacy, it's still true even today. Anything that you touch that's an Apple device, even if it's something as simple as a trackpad that you might use on your desk, they all have round corners. And I didn't know until I read about this how they actually affect the brain's ability to compute things. So here's how we deal with round corners in the inspector in FileMaker. If you go overboard with it, you're going to have some odd looking shapes. But if you work together with the corner radius and the shape of and the size of the object, you can make some really good looking circular shapes. The example I'm showing you here shows that you can have a corner radius of 70 when the object is twice that number. And here you're seeing what I commonly use as a header for either a field or a column, a portal that has data arranged in columns or reports the same way. It's just an object that has rounded corners only in the upper left and upper right. If you're using a button bar, you can't do that because the button bars don't permit a different radius for each corner. So whatever you select for your segment is going to be consistent in every portion of the button bar. Now, I mentioned before that in 2007, the introduction of iOS was a game changer. And not only did it give us apps that we didn't have before, about a year later, we got FileMaker Go. The first version, of course, in July 2010, we had to pay for it. FileMaker Go on the iPhone was $29 and on the iPad was $39. But it had a profound effect on what we do with design because it really made users elevate their expectation of what things should look like with all the variety of things that they were able to download onto their devices from the App Store. We also got the FileMaker SDK a few years after that. And by that time, there was no longer a price. Claris very quickly withdrew the price for FileMaker Go. In different versions, as we went from 12 all the way up to 16, it's been free. And of course, beyond 16, we're now at 21 or 22 about to come out very soon. So Heather Winkle was somebody who worked for Adobe before she came to work for Claris. And her influence was really significant because when we went from version 7 to version 12, we got a whole new series of tools that we didn't have before. And Heather was remarkable and her ability to influence the engineering team to do things that they had never been asked to do before that. So all of these features with the inspector and themes and floating windows and the use of gradients and image slicing, all of these things come from her background with Adobe. She's no longer with Claris. I think today she's working for either Delta Airlines or a major bank, but her expertise on graphic design is the same. I wish she would come back to Claris and do some of her magic for future versions. One of the things that we got, thanks to Heather, was the ability to put shadows underneath or around different objects. I think it's important to be subtle with them. So I'm showing you an example of a line of text where the shadow is 50%, almost looks offensive. At least to me, it's just too much. But if it's really subtle, it can be used, and subtlety is actually the best way to describe it. These tools are nice in the sense that you can interactively dial them up or down until you get the result that you want with an object selected. You don't have to like go back to browse mode in order to see it take effect. And we also have the ability to have dimmed parent windows. So for instance, when you bring up a new window that is in the card style, you have the option to dim whatever is in the parent window beneath it. The card window will always open up dead center unless you specify that you want it to go somewhere else. By default, it'll be dead center in your window. I mentioned padding before. I'm a big advocate of it. It's part of what gets stored in a style. So if you're changing the padding values in a field that is otherwise identical to a different field, you're going to have to give it another name or somehow indicate that the padding is different. When I use radio buttons, very often I don't want, especially when it's a Boolean value for a radio button, I don't want the number 1 to be beside the radio button. So what I'll do is I'll indent with the padding some number that just makes the number go outside the visible range of the field. Personally, I like fields to be vertically centered in the alignment. I wish I had the ability to specify that as a default for everything I do in the database, but I can only pray that we'll sometimes have the ability to do that in our preferences. We don't have it yet. And the radio buttons that we have and the checkboxes that we have, I'm showing you this technique for changing the padding, doesn't do any good in WebDirect. When you're in WebDirect, you're stuck with the tiny little radio button or checkbox that your browser has as its default. So my workaround for that is to, oops, this slide came up too soon. The workaround that I have for that is to use objects that I take from the emojis for a check mark or a radio button field. and use them instead of, or to cover up what would otherwise be on the layout. So I would hide the standard FileMaker radio button and in its place put a graphic that is hidden or shown based on whatever value is in the field. You have this group of iOS keyboards that are available to you in the inspector. And I keep them in a database that just has 7 records in it, so that if I have forgotten which one of these is the one that I want to apply, I have a resource I can go to very quickly to visually see them. And I'm going to give that FMP file with those 7 records to Ron this afternoon, so maybe we can post it together with the recording or some other way. Now, themes they're good and bad. I mean, they're really wonderful if you use them properly, if you use them extensively. If you only use them a little bit, it's almost not worth using at all. First thing to say about themes is if you've got the classic theme in any one of your apps, try to get rid of it. I so often read in the community that classic is blamed for all other things that go wrong with databases. So it's really best to get rid of it if you can, and just replace it with something else. I despise the Apex Blue. I don't like the fact that no matter how many times I will change a layout from Apex Blue to something else, and then I go through the whole database to make sure that I have nothing using Apex Blue, and then I'll delete Apex Blue as a theme, it comes right back again like a bad penny. As soon as you create a new layout, it will be in Apex Blue. I don't know if the rumor is true that that will be fixed in the next version we see, but I'm certainly hoping that that's the case. I just don't like Apex Blue. Maybe some other people do. Minimalist is the best one to begin with for reports because there's an absence of a lot of color, and the number of pre-configured styles in minimalist is very small. I sometimes will make a separate theme for desktop, laptop, tablet, phone, or web use, just because the sizes differ so much, the font sizes in the fields. And once in a while, I've used this feature where you can import themes from other apps. So if you're confident that you've made a really good theme that can be used universally, then you can import it from one database to another. The fact that they show up in red is really a problem for me. I have a color blindness issue. Really hard for me to see red on black. I'm happy to tell you that there's a lady at Apple who's working on this issue. There are a lot of places in FileMaker where that red color is difficult to see. But I favor working in dark mode. It's just easier on the eyes. So I just have to make sure that I look for the asterisk that's beside the style name to really let me know that the style has changed rather than depend on the red color. That may not affect all of you as well. Stylo was presented at one of the DevCons long ago by a fellow named Bob Shockey. I'm giving you his web address. Maybe he still has it available if you wanted to obtain it from him. It was a FileMaker database that was meant to be a visualizer for different styles and themes, because you could record features like conditional formatting, you could override styles. I mention it only because I know it exists. I stopped using it after about a year or two, but it was a really good creative suggestion that Bob made. And I've spoken with him by email about 2 years ago to see if he wants to bring it out again, but he doesn't want to put any more time and effort into it. So the best thing to do if you wanted to contact him was to see if he could send you a copy of what he did long ago. The hide attribute is probably one of my favorite, if not the favorite thing, because so much can be done with it. being able to have certain things on layouts appear or disappear according to all kinds of conditions that you can define. I couldn't do without it. It's really, the moment we got that feature, I became an active user of it. One of the things that I do with it is I have a custom function that I abbreviated with the name, the letters DV, which stands for Developer Visible. And it's a very simple function, and it allows me to just specify in the inspector that I want a certain object to be visible only to me. Seldom will I have other developers who are active in a database with full access. But if there are, what they'll learn very quickly is that there are things that are visible to them that are not visible to any of the users of the database. So anytime I will bring on somebody to work with me with full access, I'll make them aware that these objects that they're seeing are only there because of this developer visible function that's applied to them. Placeholder text. I think I read somewhere that there's something coming in the next version that has to do with placeholder text, where it will automatically populate the field based on whatever the field name is. You would usually want to change that anyway to something other than the name of the field, but the placeholder text is a valuable way to give people the ability to know what goes into a field without having to put a field label beside it. So something like city, state, and zip, or country are obvious once somebody has typed the value in there, and I don't have to take up unnecessary space on a layout with a field label. You can also use language options to specify what will appear by calculating the placeholder text. And you can decide whether that placeholder text should be available in find mode. Generally, anything that I have in browse mode, I'll also have in find mode, but I suppose there are occasions when I want it to be different. I think I went the wrong direction there, sorry. So with value lists, there are a few comments that are worthwhile. In the edit box, if you check the box to autocomplete, then it will really function nicely to only show you existing values. Whether you choose the always for scrolling or when scrolling is just a matter of preference, or sometimes space on a layout. The radio button, I've discussed a little while ago what I do with the radio button. A common one that I often want to remind people is that it shouldn't be called sex, it should be called gender, because sex is a matter of personal preference and gender is something else. But again, radio buttons are an easy way to let people make their choice. With the checkboxes, you have only one option in Claris, which we got several versions ago, to have a check mark rather than an X. But here is where I'm showing you that you can create your own check marks or radio buttons using the emoji method that I was showing you before, and have those be objects that are either hidden or shown based on whatever is in the field, and let the field itself always be hidden. In pop-up menus, my comment here is that the last attribute, the one that's called override data formatting with value list, I don't know what engineer thought of that as an explanation of what it is, but what it really means is that if you are using a value list that has a first and a second value, this check mark will make sure that the second one is the one that shows up. To me, that just isn't really overriding any formatting. In the drop-down list, I seldom use drop-down lists because users tend to create records that have misspellings in them. I really am more strict about pop-up menus, and if there's a reason why other values need to be added that the user cannot add with a pop-up menu and the edit function, that's where I'll put it in the control panel. So if somebody I can think of an example where I was dealing with a Colorado company that wanted to have a value list of only the cities that they serve in their territory. So I just gave them in the control panel a way that they could build that list in a portal and not have accidental typographical or duplicate entries go into the drop-down list. And in the calendar, there's really nothing special to say about it except that you can hide or show the pop-up calendar. If the calendar is pointing to things like date of birth, it's really better to let people just enter the date of birth, because otherwise they have to play around endlessly with going backward in the years until they can find the year in question. So the concealed edit box, I'm making very heavy use of that in the new app that I talked about in the beginning, the payment processing, where somebody will be able to enter something like a credit card number, but then it's hidden from view with the concealed edit box. And the way I accomplish that is by putting two fields, one on top of the other. The field on the surface is locked in browse mode, but it presents the value in the concealed edit box. The one underneath it is a normal edit box that allows somebody to see the value. So if they're allowed as a user to see the field that has the real value in it, they just have to click on the bullets that are in the concealed edit box, and it will allow them to see or change what's underneath it. If their privilege set doesn't allow them to make those kind of changes or see it, then they can click all they want on the bullets and they won't be able to see the field underneath it.
That's also something else that doesn't work in
WebDirect?
WebDirect.
Yes, yes, that's true. Thank you. So here, as we get toward the end of today's presentation, I'm going to show you what goes on with these scalable vector graphics. There's a URL at the bottom with a slide with a web page that Claris has published that explains it more. There's a web site called the Noun Project where you can select all kinds of icons that are in the scalable vector graphic mode, which are useful for your buttons. Alexis Allen does a wonderful presentation about them at FM Design University. And the Macintosh has a new application called Sketch, and Windows has one called Inkscape for creating vector graphics. This is an example of what you would do if you were building a database for Shell and you wanted their logo to be used on buttons. In Illustrator, what you would do first is you would create the image, and then you would define things like the outline that goes around it. And after that, you would more closely define the interior and the objects in the interior, and then you would give them the necessary colors that they need. And then in the end, what you would do with that entire thing is you would save it as an SVG graphic. The problem, however, when you're working in Illustrator is that the versions of the SVG give you something that is no good in FileMaker. So what would happen is when you try to insert it into the button dialog and you choose it, you're going to get something like this. And all of the text that's highlighted has to be deleted. You can open it in a text editor to see it that way. And when you delete it, now you've got the proper text, and then you're able to magically insert it into the button dialog. This is a sliding drawer technique that's used with tooltips that trigger a script to make something pop out from the left side. And here I'm showing you something that we've already discussed a little bit about the arrangement of objects on a layout. I wish Claris would give us an improved custom dialog option. I sometimes get into an unnecessary dispute with someone in the community who tells me that, well, it doesn't matter, you can just use a new window. But there's something wonderful about custom dialogues, is that you can very quickly create something if the number of buttons is limited to 3. You don't have to write a lot of complex scripts or make special objects. The problem that I don't like with it is that even though it appears beautifully in iOS and it even appears fine in WebDirect, it still doesn't allow you in FileMaker Pro to specify the size and position of the dialog. So if you had to work with a new window, the advantage is that you can control the size and position. You can decide if you want it to be a modal dialog or a card window. It dims the parent window, and you can have more than 4 buttons if necessary. But those are the pros. The cons are that you got to make more layouts and you got to make more script steps. And I think when I made this slide, it wasn't available in WebDirect, but I think now New Window is. Sometimes I'll make an off-screen window when I don't want the user to see what's going on. So I'll just push the window to 3,000 or 4,000 points off to the right or to the top or the bottom, somewhere where it's not in view. You got to be a little bit careful with that, because if people have 2 displays, all of a sudden it'll appear on their opposite display. But in this example, I'm doing something with a function that I just don't want the user to have to see. So the activity occurs in a new window, and when it's done in the script, that window closes. If you're like me, you don't go to the tab order until the very, very, very end of the development, when you're really sure that things are not going to change anymore. And I'll admit that sometimes I forget to go back to it. But it's a useful thing to use. The problem is if you do it too early in the development and you're constantly making changes on the layout, you're going to find the behavior is erratic. I'm a big user of merge fields because they allow you to line up things without having to worry about the baseline or the sliding left and right and not working properly. Especially for reports where somebody doesn't have to get into a field, you can display the data. And sometimes in a merge field, it doesn't take as much space as the actual field. And you can use it for globals as well. In this here, you're seeing I'm pointing to a field value, and here I'm pointing to a global variable. And here I'm pointing to one of the inserted symbols that you can bring in from the insert menu. And what's nice about it is that when it's all combined, it looks totally legible and more like a report. Layout calculations are one of the newest things that we've gotten, and they're pretty good. What you just have to be careful about is that if the user is not on version 20.3 or higher, they're going to see a question mark. And they can work as labels for things. They can appear beside ordinary buttons. In the example I'm showing you here, it's a copyright that I will sometimes put in the footer of a database that I'm building. The little gray one on the left is showing correctly because the context of the layout isn't specified, but I happen to be on a layout where that is the context. Whereas if I was on a different layout other than the globals layout, I would have to specify and make it explicit so that, well, context matters. And you can get to the layout calculation very easily. It's probably barely visible in the slide, but there's a keyboard shortcut for it. And they're good, so I encourage those. Another new thing that's come about recently on the Macintosh is something called iPhone mirroring, where you can have your iPhone plugged in with a lightning cable, or it can work wirelessly. And what it allows you to do is bring up a layout that lets you actually click into it, so you can perform the functions without having to hold the phone in your hand and actually use your fingertip, and you can experiment with that iPhone mirroring side by side with a layout and do your adjustments live. I used to do this with, what was it called? QuickTime something. What is it called now? QuickTime. Anyway, QuickTime allowed you to open it up as a movie recording, and you could see it on your screen. This is better. Tab stop headers are something I use quite a lot when I want to specify the position. So in this example of an aqua colored header, I've got text that I want to have appear directly over certain fields. And I don't want separate objects that I have to align and worry about them moving. But in WebDirect, it doesn't work. So in Pro, it works really well. To get to these tab stop headers, you have to go to the format line spacing and then look for other. And then when you're in other, you get the paragraph dialog. And then in the lower left corner of that, you can click on tabs, and then you can see the various tab values. And they're always expressed in 3 decimals. If you need to be really, really specific about it, you can put in your fill characters. It's just not as easy to work with as if there was a separate dialog that went directly to those tabs. You can get to them in the inspector, and that's one shortcut. And the beauty of it is that you can take a layout that is otherwise looking rather haphazard and turning it into nice, neat columns based on where you've positioned those tab stops. Virtual lists are probably not new to you, but it's another way of combining the various things that I've just talked about. So you can take that virtual list and format it with a header that has the header column headers in the exact position that they're needed. For reports, there are lots of ways to make them. I've already mentioned to you that you can't really specify page breaks. Being able to export to Excel or save as snapshot link are 2 that I have very often used. The snapshot link, especially when I want to reopen a database to the exact layout and found set and sort order that I was in when I last used it. One example or use case you might think of is a bookkeeper who's doing accounts receivable work and trying to collect money, and it's time for him or her to check out at 5 o'clock and go home, but they want to begin their work the next day without having to remember what was the found set where they left off. If the last thing they do before they close the file is to make a snapshot link, then all they have to do is click on that, and it'll take them right back to where they were the day before. Saving records as PDF is helpful. The append script step was added a few years ago so that you can have multiple page lengthy PDFs that combine through the script step, starting with the first one, creating the PDF, and then all the successive ones can be appended to it. I'm an advocate of using color on PDFs because obviously they don't have to be printed. Black and white printers wouldn't show the color, but keep in mind that somebody might print it in black and white, so you don't want to have something be so color intensive that it's going to use up all their toner or their color cartridges, which is the point that I'm making here about avoiding color, unless you're sure that if they've got a color printer that it's what they might want to see. And also keep in mind that 3-hole drilled paper could obscure some of the text that's on your page. So it's useful to have at least a few sheets of paper that you can put through as a test to make sure that you know where those holes will fall. In this case, it was a dashboard report that was made so that the people in the company could see on a large screen monitor that was on the wall certain elements of their business that were important to them. And it made for a crowded but a useful homepage for the database. If you're working with color, you can rely on some of these resources about moods and complementary colors. It's kind of the same thing as working with fonts. Don't overdo it. Don't throw too many colors into a layout. The FileMaker tool for the color palette is nice in the sense that the top section gives you these complementary colors. And at Adobe, you can also work with what they call their color wheel if you're looking to create a theme of complementary colors that work for you. This is one that gives you a choice of HTML color mixing at the URL at W3 Schools. And I'm a big advocate of base elements because it will allow me to review previous versions and to see what the errors are like in a summary report. It comes with a price, but I think it's worth it. Allows you to compare different versions. It's not the only DDR analysis tool. I'm just mentioning it because it's one that I'm in favor of using. I always like Mark Twain quotes because they bring a laugh. And here we're at the very end of my presentation. Object weight is something that I learned in desktop publishing. Different objects have a certain amount of weight that will pull the eye toward them on a layout. And you can use the rotation of a monitor in order to decide whether you want to view it in its standard arrangement orientation or sideways or upside down. So when you're thinking about negative space, here's the famous NBC logo. It looks like a bunch of colored ovals until you see the peak of the peacock's nose. And then you can sort of train your eye to see that, that's what's in the negative space. Or in this example, at first glance, it looks like two faces looking toward one another. But then if you sort of train your eye looking at it differently, you see that it's a white vase. There's another element to the weight, which is color. These two objects are very different in size, but they have the same exact weight. So a little bit more of the gray makes it equal to a smaller black object. And what I call a balancing act is what you can do in order to determine whether or not if you want to rotate an object, you can see whether or not it's in balance when it's upside down. That's why I showed you how you can rotate a monitor. You can't easily rotate a FileMaker layout, but you can rotate the monitor. And here's another example of the same thing. You can look at a web page and you can see whether or not it's balanced by turning it on its head. And if it looks like it's in balance both ways, then you know you're in good shape. I found in version 18 that there was a peculiar style behavior that was being affected by the line thickness and also by the blur characteristic. And I don't know yet whether or not that was fixed. I think it was, but this presentation was done at a time when that was active. So that may or may not be relevant. I just don't know why these objects, other than my discovery that it was the blur that was applied or the line thickness that made them appear improperly in version 19. And finally, on consistency, these are just a few examples of web pages where the entire site is consistently using the same sort of graphic appearance. So if you're curious about how you could integrate that into FileMaker, it's very easy to just explore some popular or favorite websites and see how they do it. Some are more simple than others, but they achieve a consistency that works whether it's on a phone or whether it's on a desktop, and not that hard to learn from the examples of people who are paid a lot of money to do projects like that. We'll skip that because I don't remember, other than the Design Shack URL, what I intended here. And finally, I like this quote that Mr. Bushnell made about the deadlines being the ultimate inspiration, because that's something we all have to deal with. So I'm at the end, and I have time for Q&A.
Thanks, Dennis.
Dennis, I have a quote that goes along with Bushnell.
Uh-huh.
He said, I read somewhere a long time ago that projects are never completed, merely abandoned.
Hmm.
So in so many industries that I've worked in, you know, you get to a certain point and you're like, good enough. You never, but you always have this sense hanging over your head that, oh man, I could have done more. I could have done this, could have done that, but we got to get it out there. So we have to
That's true. And
abandon it.
Jonathan, that's also one of the blessings of FileMaker that I always include if I'm presenting something to a new client. And they ask me, well, when will it be done? And the answer is never.
Yeah,
Because in FileMaker, there's so much, and often when you show something to people in FileMaker that's new to them, it inspires them to come up with ideas. I'm sure you've all gotten this question where they start the question for you with, is it possible to do?
Yeah.
And then they tell you what they want to do. And the answer is almost always, yes, of course it is. You just have to pay me to do it.
Yeah.
That's why I tell them, no, it's never done, and it's your fault. Because as you work on this, you're going to find more stuff that you want to do. So that's why I give, for every project, there's a free year of bug fixes and tweaks. You can have free tweaks for a whole year, and that's included in the price.
I do something similar where I allow them to have hosting on my server for as long as I'm being hired to do work.
Oh, that's nice.
And once the project is idle, in the sense that they don't need me on a regular basis to do anything and they're actually using it, then they'll either pay for the hosting or they can move the file to their own server or something like that.
Yeah. Well, the way I do it is after a year of free tweaks and free conversations and free whatever, then they can buy a maintenance package
Right.
that is a small monthly or yearly discount, and
Right.
And then we can continue on the same way, but the first year is free.
And the feature of FileMaker that isn't, I think, marketed well enough by Claris is the fact that compared to other systems, you can make changes on the fly. Now, there may be people who advocate against doing that on a production system, but very often the tweaks that you're describing don't matter a great deal. And
Right.
You don't have to take the system offline to make the change and then put it back on and have a period of downtime. It could be something as simple as a spelling error or a color change that doesn't affect the programming or the behavior of the app.
Right.
As an in-house developer for like 10 years, that same situation you talked about held true, where as the years went by, the owner of the company stopped asking me if I could do it or if FileMaker could do it. And the question just became, what would it take? And is it worth the work? And is it worth the development overhead? Because it came about because it got to be a running joke that when he would ask me if FileMaker could do it or if we could do it, and I would tell him, well, the answer is always yes. Can it be done? The answer is always yes. The question is, how much time do you want me to dedicate to it? So, yeah.
My favorite example of that is a fellow who I dealt with years ago is a college professor on a certain subject, and he was selling on his website books that he had written and attendance at some webinars that he was doing. And people would, and he had a web developer who built the page that somebody would go to put in their name and credit card information. And what he would do is he would get an email that this web developer had created that told him that, Ron has purchased this thing, and he would print out the email and walk across the room to the other side of his office where he had a different computer that was running MYOB where he could charge the credit card. And his question to me at the time was, would it be possible for me to, actually his wife said to me, would it be possible for this to happen so that Dan could actually come to dinner and not be like a captive to his computer, because he felt like if the person didn't get an instant confirmation of the fact that they had bought something, they would buy it again, or they would call on the phone and start asking, you know, did you get my email? And he wanted to be able to go out with his wife to dinner.
I got a few comments and questions, but before we get too far away from your last slide, which was Nolan Bushnell, right? Right, Dennis?
I can barely hear you, John.
Yeah, you need to move that.
Let me put the microphone in front of my face. Is that better?
That's a good idea.
You always forget to do that.
Well, it's on this giant arm, yeah, and it's in the way. Sorry. Before I get too far away from your last slide about Nolan Bushnell, right?
Uh-huh.
I got to make a comment that my sister's a widow twice. Her first husband was the third engineer hired at Atari and worked with Nolan Bushnell, and they were really good friends. His name was Lawrence Leppert. They became really good friends. And in fact, I eventually ended up working at Atari with Steve Jobs. So this is how old I am, right? But one day, my sister's having a garage sale. They got divorced, and she was selling everything in the garage. And I came across a book that was Electrical Engineering 101 from Stanford University that had Nolan Bushnell's signature in it. And I'm like, why are you selling this for 25 cents? And so I wish I still had that book. So kind of an interesting thing. Yeah, I used to assemble joysticks for Super Pong and steering wheels for Tank, because my brother-in-law invented Tank, if you guys remember that game.
So 25 cents was too rich for you?
Yeah. Oh, I'd love to have that book now. A couple things I wanted to comment on: themes and style names. And yeah, there's no industry or community standard for that. I hired Ronnie Higgins, if any of you know him, real nice developer from Orange County, California, back in 2019 to come up with conventions that we ended up presenting at a session at DevCon. And I paid him like $4 or $5 grand to just come up with a whole theme and style and educate me. And he was strongly from the world of Matt Petrowski under that discipline and gave me great insight. And we came up with conventions that I since have changed. And I actually want to come up with a current, specifically not so much the theme, but the style names, because you don't have a lot of room, especially on Windows. So I'm using dot delimited things, and field would be FLD, buttons BTN, and I'm going to come up with a convention that's even more cryptic, but allows me to have various styles. I like the idea that you use various themes or different layouts. Most of my systems have one theme, and I have hundreds of different styles, right? And just for field styling, I might have 100, I might have 80 different field styles: centered, left, big, little, justified left, justified right, all that stuff. And even mine have gotten out of control. So now I'm hearing this, I'm feeling even more pressure to come up with a nice template for this.
Well, I would say that what you were first suggesting about including the FLD or BTN to indicate that it's a button or indicates a field, that's really unnecessary, because unless you click the show all checkbox,
it will filter
styles, it filters them for you.
That's a good point.
When you go from WebDirect to, let's say, a phone layout, it's I find helpful to just have a different theme and have that applied to that layout.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And I might go that way. I think I still would stay with some preface by the type of style, the category of style, in case I showed them on, but I can now reduce it to like F for field and B for button and L for label. I'm going to consider that. I don't want to completely eliminate them, but shorter is better, because you run out of, I think it's like 14 or 16 characters on Windows, and then you lose it.
Yeah, there's another similar thing between Windows and Mac, that in Windows, you can, in the inspector, you can copy a field name but in Mac, you can only look at it
Oh, interesting.
in the data palette.
You know,
Panel.
at one time, I set to work on trying to develop a theme and do all of that. All of those different objects where, this one's got the border on the top and left, this one's got the border on the bottom and right, and all of the different variations of a field and what borders
Right.
have what colors, what indentation. And it just got so convoluted and so unwieldy that I changed my kind of approach to more of a minimalistic theming. So I'm not doing a whole lot of different theme objects. Um, but some of the key things, so I do like a template system that I can do a different color scheme for, when I do a new file. But as long as all I'm changing is like the background color or the text color in that object, the borders don't, like I could be using that object in many different places and have different border setups on all those objects. Well, when I change and save the theme object, as long as I haven't changed the borders, it doesn't reset all of those objects. Uh,
But I think when you do that, Ron, you have to be careful not to save that
you do.
style, because otherwise there it goes across everywhere else that
Right.
you've used
Right.
that
You
name.
do have to be conscious of where you want to start with, save the style and then not, and not mess with it. But it has ended up working out really well for me because now I can take a copy of my template and go through and change the color scheme in, 20 or 30 minutes through a whole file and, do the saving selectively and on the right examples of the styled object so that if it's like uh, you make the changes on the object that contains just the style. It's unmodified. So you make the change on the unmodified style. That doesn't change any of the modified ones. So
Right.
it takes a lot of getting used to and understanding of
Right.
when to make the right change at the right time and how to make those changes without affecting everything. So I can change the color of the font, but now I'm not running into fields where it's like, oh my God, now I've changed the borders on this whole set of fields that I didn't want to change, or the padding, or all of those different things. So it takes some consciousness and understanding and kind of a strategy for doing that. But for me personally, and just my experience is that it's worked out well for me where I'm not trying to manage a theme with 500 styles with all of these different cryptic names for which one is supposed to be which and stuff like that. So that was
When
just
I'm
my
conscientious about it, and I make sure that I don't have any layouts with unsaved themes or unsaved objects,
yeah,
um, the dividend is that when I do need to change one, and I am happy to have it applied globally,
right,
like if I want to change Helvetical to Arial, for instance, for some reason, that it can happen
right. But
beautifully.
it
But you
takes a
really
lot
have to
of
make an investment of time as you go along, and it's almost like a decision that's made in the beginning where you're saying to yourself, "I will do this, and I will
yeah.
not take shortcuts to get around it because I'm going to pay the price for doing that."
Right. Yeah. And
I've always,
it's quite a lot of overhead to try and, build and manage a theme like that. And for me, the situation to come across that, like, if I wanted to just change most of the elements, I don't ever change just the colors.
Huh.
And it's like, so for me to invest all the time and overhead developmentally to manage a theme that's got all of that complexity is for me, the trade-off just isn't there for the fact that, okay, I made a change. I need to make some changes to something. Maybe I have to do it on a few different layouts and a few different objects compared to one click. It changes it globally. But I've also got to manage this high overhead of managing this complicated theme. So
And
that's
what
and
just
this,
John was
my
saying
my approach.
before, what John was saying before reminded me that it's the reason that I had such an interest in Bob Shockey's Stylo program, because he was coming up with a way of handling the nomenclature. Um, so
Yeah.
I would like to see a table, if anybody knows of one or can give me feedback, that shows the exceptions to what does not get saved in a style. certain things like, whether it's a drop down or a calendar or things like that. Whatever
Yeah,
field, especially field attributes, do not get affected by style. I would like to see that on a list. I don't
yeah,
know where
like
to
for
look.
instance, height and width,
Yeah, I think you would
things
find
like
that in
that.
the
Don't.
help file, there's probably the inverse of what you were just asking for.
Yeah,
Because
right.
it'll tell you what is affected, but it won't tell you what's not.
That's not so helpful, right? That's what I've run into. I end up stumbling over it.
Dennis, you talked about being from the desktop publishing world. Do you do the graphic arts?
Yeah.
Um, I find that roughly half the FileMaker developers I meet, estimated, are from the graphic arts world. For some strange reason, I run into people all the time that started in exactly the same place, working for printing companies, working for paste up and layout operations that went desktop publishing, which is where I came from.
I was in the business that is the hat that you're wearing. I had a niche business that was doing vector graphic conversions of garbage from the people who sell promotional products.
Oh,
So in the case of your
Alan
hat,
knows all about that too.
right. In the case of your hat, you're dealing probably with embroidery. I can't see it
Yeah,
close enough to
it
know
is.
for sure, but there were all kinds of methods of decorating. And when I got out of that industry, I wrote a book that was called Your Imprint Here, that was all about the many decorating techniques that existed,
Oh, that's
uh,
cool.
going back to the very first logo that was ever done commercially, and that was the London Underground.
Yeah.
Stephen Blackwell has his hand up.
Well, I had a point. I'm
Oh.
sorry. I wanted
Go
to
ahead.
get to a point. I started off, I was totally immersed in PageMaker, and I spent many years in PageMaker and InDesign and Quark Xpress. I used to love Quark Xpress until they destroyed the program. And what has always frustrated me about FileMaker, and even when you get into HTML and CSS, the thing about FileMaker is it's not cascading. There's no cascading style sheets. Like in all these other programs, whenever you're dealing with style sheets, there's a cascading element to it. Nothing in FileMaker that way.
Didn't it take till CSS3 to get cascading? Alex, your time
Well,
to
it's
shine.
in the name, CSS, cascading style sheets.
Yeah.
It was in the name.
He was
But
asking.
PageMaker did it back in the early 90s. Had style. And I used to teach PageMaker at the college where I worked, and I would tell people the very first thing you do is create the styles.
Well, you're right.
Create
And
the heads and the body style and everything. Create those, and then your document comes together pretty quickly.
you're right. And the reason I mentioned what I did about page breaks is because I came to FileMaker after using a MicroPro product that was called WordStar, ReportStar, InfoStar, and it was a CPM program. It also was in Windows, but it had something on the left edge of the items that would be on your report, and it was called the dot command. And all you had to do is put a dot there, and you could indicate that's where you want the page to break. And when I first got into FileMaker, it was just not available to do page breaks. You had to guess at the length of the page. And of course, the visual indicator of where the page will break is a little bit helpful, but there's no guarantee if you have a sub-summary part that that's where it's going to be.
Yeah.
Stephen
Ron, are we out of?
had his hand up for a while, so.
Oh, Ron, I just want to ask real quick, are we out of time or can we go a little further with questions and comments?
I mean, I'm not ready to slam the door in everybody's face, but.
Okay, whoever was
I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
I'll bookmark, but somebody was ahead of me.
Yeah, Stephen Blackwell's got his hand up. Stephen?
Yes, if we are essentially through with comments, just one item of possible interest. If you go to claris.com/company, you will see that Peter Nelson is no longer a VP of engineering. Apparently, possibly has left the company.
Oh, wow.
That was a pretty interesting development.
Interesting.
That's a big one.
Yeah, and did I
Seemed
hear
like he
Andy
never got
LaCates?
along with who's the last guy before Ryan? Excuse me.
I was just going to say, did Andy LaCates retire? Is he?
Andy retired. I had a call with him before his retirement. He said it wasn't a forced retirement, but it wasn't 100% voluntary either. He
Oh,
would have
wow.
been happy to stay.
Really?
Yeah, I had kind of a connection with him because I met him a few years ago at Pause on Air, and we had a joke where he walked up and I said, "Hey, it's like my last name, but in French," because his last name was LaCates.
Uh-huh.
And
Right.
he's he went, yeah, that, and that's not too far from the truth because when people immigrated to America, a lot of times the last names were changed to make them more Americanized and stuff. And so we had this whole conversation, and the whole time I had no idea who he was. So we made this
Well,
great connection, and he's always been wonderful to say hi to me when he sees me at conferences and stuff like that. So yeah, that was kind of neat. So I'm sorry to see him go.
I want
Rick
to.
knew him before he even came to Claris the
Yeah.
first time. And then he was there, he left, he came back. And I think he's just out doing some things that he and his wife and their grown children wanted to do now. But he certainly was a mainstay of the company.
Yeah.
Rick
Who was
Calvin
it?
started taking his place.
Yeah, Rick has the
Thor.
title of evangelist now, which
He's-
was Andy's title. But who was
Oh,
it
really?
that Stephen Blackwell said is gone now?
Peter Nelson.
Peter
Oh,
Nelson,
Peter Nelson. Oh.
apparently.
I used to see him in everything that was online. Whenever Brad Freitag and Peter Nelson were online together, they would argue like hell right in front of everybody. Like they did not get along. Am I the only one who noticed that?
Yeah,
I'm not the
Peter.
spokesman for Claris, so I can't announce that, but he's not on the page. So
Yeah,
draw
right.
whatever inference you want.
He did not have a deep FileMaker background, and I had a lot of troubles with the directions he kept seeing, trying to do things without understanding the history and where most FileMaker developers were. He was very disconnected to what the actual developers were like out in the field.
Wow.
That's good insight, Taylor.
Thank you. I've been doing a lot of WebDirect for the last 12 years, and I got a couple questions here. I'm currently supporting a system that I've been working on for, 15 years that used to be an instant web publishing, and we redesigned the whole thing, and it's WebDirect, massive use at a drug company. And they're still in FileMaker 19.4 because they are 2 or 3 years behind migration because they have to validate all the system for 250,000 users of FileMaker. So what I'm noticing, I still get complaints because I design on Windows. Some of the administration happens on Mac, that the field label size, when I design it on Windows, I have to add roughly another 10 pixels to make it render on Mac without rolling over or cropping. And I just did a test on FileMaker 21 while Dennis was talking, and now it looks like it's backwards. I looked at it on my Mac Mini versus my Windows 10 machine, and I'm noticing that the fonts that work on Mac are rolling over for Windows. And it depends on the font, because because I'm with WebDirect, I typically use Arial, Verdana, and Trebuchet, and not much else, so I don't have any platform issues. But I just tried it Verdana and Arial, and now the Mac works fine and the Windows is rolling it. Can anybody comment on when that changed and what recent versions were?
Do you know Will Porter?
No, the name sounds
gonna
familiar. It's not
send
Heidi
you-
Porter's brother, is it?
No, I'm going to send you Will's
Okay.
address. Will is now in San Antonio, and he made himself a WebDirect expert. And his reason was that it eliminated the need for his clients to have to constantly update their version of FileMaker Pro. He just wanted them to be using a web browser. So
Wow,
there are
that's very
some
smart.
things that are browser specific and other things that may be platform specific. And Will is a fountain of great information about WebDirect.
Yeah, but yet
I've
in this
created a couple. I created quite a few web directs too, and I had that same issue for a while because of the fonts. They don't have them on. It had a lot to do whether they had them on their browser or loaded in their browser. So you can add that font onto the FileMaker server. I can't remember. It's been a long time since I needed to do that, but you can add it to the server so that when the browser goes and connects, it sees the font and uses it correctly.
Wow.
Okay, good. The point I want to make, though, what I think I got a little off track, was that while this is a highly WebDirect used system on both Mac and PC, the administration happens in FileMaker Pro client, right? And some are on Mac, some are on PC. And in the FileMaker Pro client is where the field labels are wrapping or cropping.
Right.
And
But
I
you
don't
can,
know
like I
what
said,
direction is accurate anymore. Go on.
that's why I said you can add those fonts to the web server.
But no,
have to
this
look
is for
that up. I can't
FileMaker Pro client, not for WebDirect.
Oh,
These are
for
these
on
are
the Windows
client
side?
client stations, Apple to PC. FileMaker Pro is not rendering the labels consistently across platform. It's always used to be an issue, and I wonder if it's changed, because when I test this in 21, it's in reverse, but when we look at on 19, it's the other way around. The Mac crops and the Windows don't. And in 21, the Windows crops, the Mac doesn't.
Well, one thing you do is use fonts that are the same and use open type fonts. Make sure you're not using true type ones. You got open type on all these different platforms, because they're the only ones that are really the same across platforms.
All right. Can I
And
control
you
that on
can
Windows?
say goodbye to all of the type 1 PostScript fonts because they're no longer supported.
Right. Yeah. Open type's the way to go on both platforms. The other thing is, if you got an Ubuntu server, you always have to add fonts there. People are so used to using Windows and Mac servers that come with a bunch of fonts. But if you do a FileMaker server that's Ubuntu, you got to really pay attention to what fonts are on the operating system, because those are well, I mean, that's why Ubuntu is great, but it's so stripped down and it only has what you put on it.
Oh, interesting. Dennis, when you mentioned earlier about maybe having an object and dragging it off to actually positioning it into the scratch area by typing a number in the inspector to move it over, right?
Right.
If you do that on Mac, when I do that on Windows, every single time that object becomes invisible in the scratch area, I literally have to drag it and move it. If I do it by the numbers in the inspector, it's there and you can't see it, and you can't even marquee it.
If you go out of the layout and back into it, is it still hidden?
Yeah, it's weird.
God.
So I have to drag everything and adjust it to the point position I want in the scratch area, because I don't just put them arbitrarily. Normally, like if it's leftmost at 50 pixels, I'll put it at 1550 pixels so I can remember the odd number, right?
What I would try, John, is, let's say, for example, your layout width, the live area is 1,000. And I would move the thing to 1,001 just to see if it really vanishes the way you describe. And if it does, I would report that as a bug.
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely been happening to me.
And
it doesn't matter what computer I'm on.
15 years from now, they'll fix it.
I like the word you use for that, John, scratch area. I went into the documentation not long ago to find the official word that they use for that area. I couldn't find it anywhere.
Yeah, I've been calling it the scratch area ever since we got it in version 12, I think.
Has anybody else experienced, I develop on Windows, but I don't know what version it happened to a couple of versions ago, and I'm on 21.1 right now. When you change something in a portal and the height goes to 0.
Yes, I read that in the release notes that I was
weird.
reading the other day, because I was trying to prepare for today by seeing what is there that has changed since version 19. There's something in the release notes, but I can't recall right this minute whether it's in the group of things that they say has been addressed or as a known issue.
I've had to get in the habit of, anytime I needed to, like if I'm changing the reference on a portal You go and you change the reference to whatever table you want it to point to, and as soon as you click out of it, the height goes to 0. So I've had to make a habit of copying the height before I make any changes to a portal, so that
Hmm.
after it goes to 0, I can immediately put the height back in. So
What version? What version are you working on, Ron?
21.1 currently.
God, I've not seen that.
Oh, it's
And I'm in
terrible.
Windows.
Yeah, there
All
were a
right, well,
few
guys, I have
things.
a question. Does anybody work, or I need some insight into perform JavaScript and web server script step. I'm trying to master that quickly, and I'm floundering, and there's like 2 references online for it.
Well,
And
Brian,
it's the skimpiest
there-
thing ever.
I've reached a point in my career where I don't want to learn everything. I don't want to know everything. So I want to know who I can count on and pay when necessary. And Jeremy Brown in Orlando is he's running a great JavaScript in web viewer service.
Oh, I've seen his stuff. Yeah.
No, he's the guy. He's the man.
He's
Yeah.
made himself the guru of that topic.
Yeah.
I can
He
be the
is, and I'm
guru
watching
about
his
fonts,
stuff,
but
but
not that.
he's well, my summary is it's incomplete for tutorial, as surprising as that statement may sound. So I need another person.
He's got an office hours thing you can go to every week for at least 1 hour a week, and he posts it on the FM Slug Slack channel. I would follow him there. He's a pretty resourceful guy. I've taken training.
His work is good. When I've hired him to do work for me, it worked beautifully. So I can certainly recommend him. You know, when Jonathan was talking before about the days when we used desktop publishing tools, there's another one that I'm sure you can remember, in whether it was in InDesign or Quark. There was something called a text overflow indicator, when there was a box that had more text that could be displayed. And all you get in FileMaker is a question mark. And the ability to handle text overflow with a script is almost, it's a challenge. And it should be simple for them to display the fact with a little plus sign in the corner of the field to indicate that there's more text that can be displayed, and then either auto resize the field or let you write a script that would change the font size down by 1 point or something like that.
There used to be something to indicate that, because I ran a script like that. If it was overflow, change the font.
That's one method, or change the padding, or change you could use condensed as one of the style options.
Yeah.
But you know, on the JavaScript topic, it reminds me that Jonathan also mentioned something about Quark destroying their program. They shot themselves in the foot, because Quark started a rumor sometime in the 90s that they were going to buy Adobe. And the people at Adobe got so pissed that they had started that rumor that motivated them to build InDesign. And InDesign became the giant killer that took over the world that was dependent on Quark. All the service bureaus that used to do output gradually converted, not on InDesign 1, but InDesign 2 became wonderful.
Well, they were the PageMaker people. Adobe was the PageMaker people, and so they look, and then all these people were switching to Quark Xpress because Quark had better long document management and a lot more automated stuff. And so what Adobe did was take the best of PageMaker. So you could be a PageMaker person and use InDesign. You could be a Quark Xpress person and use InDesign. It was way better on all levels.
But they did one other thing in it. They put in the file menu the ability to open a Quark file.
Yes.
And that made the conversion so easy for everybody.
Game over. Yeah.
All right, my friends. I think we've probably gone over long enough. I've got some fires I got to get to. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Dennis, for a really good presentation. I enjoyed it. And obviously, it's been a successful group when we're 20 minutes over. I got to kick everybody
Oh.
out. So
I am
Thank you,
really
Dennis.
impressed. That was great, Dennis.
yeah,
Well, thank
I
you for
enjoyed
indulging
that.
me. Thank you for indulging me. It isn't often that I get a happy audience, and
That was great.
and once
Well,
again,
you can come
so
back. We'll be happy whenever you show
well,
up.
I'm going to
yeah,
be at full access, but the presentation that's planned there is something that Mike Ross came up with, which he called Exit Application, which is dear to me. The topic is about how to kind of diplomatically end your client relationship, where and people like me who are solo developers often get asked the question of, what if you get hit by a bus? Who's there to take over for you? And when I say I'm crossing the street looking both ways, that isn't good enough as an answer.
I
Nice.
actually got hit by a bus when I was at DevCon remember, is Brian still around? He was on the
No.
bus.
Wow.
I got thrown around the inside of a bus at DevCon in Phoenix one year. So I got taken to the hospital on a backboard.
wow.
I'm collaborating with Mike on this because I created something for myself a few years ago, a database that I called Postmortem, so that my family will be able to deal with issues, because I live alone. So, nobody's going to know, where my bank accounts are. Everything's online now. When my mom died, she had a file cabinet. It was easy to know her details. But we all live in a different world today. In fact, before we close, I'll just share this one little anecdote with you to give you a laugh. When I moved from Texas to Colorado, I found in my bookcase this vinyl thing that was called Maps of the World. It was a gift that I had gotten from a promotional products manufacturer. It had 8 clear pockets on the inside, each one holding a different Hammond map, one for each continent, and then there was an 8th one that was the whole world. And I didn't want to throw it away. I don't need it anymore. So I sent it to my daughter in California so she could let the children learn a little bit about geography. So she had called me when she had the map of Africa spread out on the living room floor, and she was trying to explain to them how the explorers used to navigate by the stars to know where they were and how to get from one place in the world to another. And my grandson, who was 10 at the time, just said, well, why didn't they just use their phone?
Yeah.
Oh, God. Hey, Ron,
Yeah.
one more 30-second pitch for full access. We're starting a collage with pictures of people wearing these hats. So whether or not you're even going to go to the event, if you're willing to wear a hat, take a picture in front of some landmark, whatever, send it to me, put it on the website. We'll send you a free hat. And they cost like $26, but it's worth it for the marketing. So if you're willing to wear a hat, have a picture on a website, send me an email, I'll send you a free hat.
Thanks again, Dennis, for being able to jump in. short
Wonderful
notice
presentation.
After our
Good.
cancellation
Thank you
again
all.
this month. And so Dennis will be back in September. Essentially, he was gracious enough to just jump in and fill in something today, but September he has a presentation he'd very much like to give. So we've got him scheduled for September. We do have the next couple months scheduled out. Next month is Jesse Burnham from I'm getting
Burnham, 360
Yeah.
Works.
360 Works. He's going to be rolling out MirrorSync 7.
Nice.
So,
Yep.
And then the month after that, we have a session lined up. So we're doing pretty good. We have the next like 3 months lined out. So thankfully that relieves a little bit of the pressure I've been feeling about trying to get somebody lined up last minute every month. So so anyway, we will be here next month, and thank you all for joining us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
All right, see you guys.